You are listening to Movies to Watch Before You Die, episode number 7. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Movies to Watch Before You Die, a weekly podcast that breaks down the most important movies ever made that will change the way you think, the way you feel, and hopefully the way you live your life. I'm your host, Mark Gazica, and joined with me today is my great friend, Alden Roth. Say hi, Alden.
Hi.
That's Alden. And Alden, what movie we're talking about today?
We are talking about Into the Wild.
That's right, Into the Wild, the 2007 film starring Emil Hirsch and directed by Sean Penn. So if you've not seen the film yet, please pause the podcast and go watch the movie. Even if you've already seen it, watch it again, because it's one of those movies that just gives you something new after every viewing. It's fantastic. And you can check out the links in the description to see where you can rent or buy the movie. Or, better yet, you can go to your local library and borrow it for free, because you pay taxes and you can do that. So, Alden, why don't we start with your general takeaway on the film? I'm certain this film has had a monumental impact on your life specifically because of your individual nature and opinions on life, or perhaps they were formed by your viewing of the film itself. So why don't you just take a moment and maybe fill viewers in on that and speak to the film if you could.
Sure. So I'm 22 and I live in a van. I also have a bus that I'm planning to convert into like a mobile home of sorts. So a lot of my free-thinking nature comes from this film, I guess. Like just not necessarily, I mean, it is free-thinking, but going against what is accepted as normal.
Right.
I get a lot of that from this film.
I think it's pretty obvious, and it's kind of, I don't want to say scary, but it's kind of odd in watching the film again now, how many similarities I saw between you and Alex. And I just thought, oh God, is this going to be Alden someday? Is this going to be Alden someday?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think that this film is very much a warning.
Yes.
As much as it is a celebration of Christopher's life and the journey he went on and talking about breaking free from societal norms and all that, it's also a warning tale that you shouldn't do exactly what he did.
Yes, and I think that's something that might get lost in translation with the sort of the beauty and the awe people end up in after viewing the film.
Yeah, I can agree with that to a point. One of the big quotes that has stuck with me since the first time I saw this was, "Happiness is only real when shared."
Yes.
And like my girlfriend she does sketches and she sketches that to me all the time. And that's just one of the things that I have kept with me since I first saw this. I guess I saw this when I was 18, freshman year of college.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really have any good friends. It was like the second month of class. And I had some close friends, but nobody as close as my best friends from home.
Yeah.
And I had just gone on my first road trip the summer before. So I had the itch to travel, to do all of that. I was in love with van life already. I wasn't living it at that point, but I had found it on Instagram and all that stuff.
Right.
And so watching this and not really feeling attached to anything in Pittsburgh, I actually hated Pittsburgh in its entirety. I've lived in Pittsburgh for 5 years now, and it's gotten better each year. But when I got here, I hated it because like I said, I had just gotten back from a road trip, and I was thinking that cities were the devil.
Yeah.
So there were lots of nights after watching this film that I was like, I have a backpack. I should just pack up and start walking west.
The film has that effect on you.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we sort of begin to explore that theme now then? The title of the film, Into the Wild, and this sort of allure that us city folk, maybe not you so much as me, I was born and raised here in Pittsburgh, but what's the sort of allure in going into the wild, do you think?
Well, I think that everybody has their own allure with it. Me personally, it's about the freedom and natural beauty, but more than anything, it's thinking about going into the wild is thinking about being human at its most basic state.
Yeah.
And I think that we get lost a lot in cities or in technology with all the stuff that's happening, and going into the wild is stripping everything that has been built up to dull the senses, I guess you could say.
Right.
But going into the wild, you have to really all of your sentences have to be on red alert all the time. You have to be constantly thinking, even when you think you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people think that like you go into nature and it's quiet and like peace of mind or whatever. But I think even when you have that peace of mind out in nature and in the wild, your mind is also at its most heightened state.
Yeah, that's true. I think we become complacent almost in civilization. And, don't get me wrong, like civilization is, the formation of civilizations is one of the greatest advents of the progress of humanity that we've, been able to create in the past hundreds of thousands of years. But in that, there's something lost when you give up the freedom you possess as an individual to do X, Y, Z, and you begin to rely on society and the civilization to provide things for you.
Right.
So there's something about just being able to walk out in the woods or look at a great landscape and...
Yeah. Man, there's so many good shots in this. Just when he's in Alaska, those landscapes are just beautiful, and it beckons you. Like,
it does.
It's like, in a way, it's like one of the greatest lusts in life.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a quote in the film by Tolstoy that Alex reads to us at one point, and it says, "If we admit that human life can be ruled by reason, then all possibility of life is destroyed." What do you make of that quote?
I guess like it's saying that we don't really have any control over. I don't know. What do you get out of that?
I think that quote is not quite the thematic premise of the film, but perhaps the premise as to why Alex has at least the bug to travel or to see the world. Because I think in civilization, in society, we live a life of reason. We live a life of logic and law, and everything has an order and a place and a time. And when you're in nature, or at least outside of that system, the only laws are the laws of nature. And I think there's a beauty in those sorts of laws. There's beauty in the laws that govern why a tree looks the way it does, or why rocks, or why rock formations form the way they do. And I think if you were to try to order that system in the same way that our society is organized, you destroy it, and it loses its beauty. It loses that quality that causes it to be revered so well.
Yeah. I think that certainly relates to why he has the itch to travel and not lead the materialistic life that his folks do.
Right.
Because he thinks that there's something greater to experience than the monotony and tediousness of everyday life.
Yeah. And I think the scene where he goes to see about how he would kayak down the river, and he's told he has to get a permit.
And he has to wait 12 years.
Right. And I think that in and of itself is an excellent representation of sort of bureaucracy encroaching upon nature, and any beauty or anything you can take from that experience of kayaking down the river is definitely lost upon having to wait 12 years to do so.
Or pay $2,000.
Exactly.
To go with a guide.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that scene, because then after he goes into Mexico, he's talking to the Border Patrol officer about how in Mexico the rivers are dried up and turned into irrigation canals because of the dam. And earlier this year, I read a book called Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. Edward Abbey was he was the ranger of Arches National Monument before it became a national park. And in part of it, he goes on a river ride through the Colorado River, going into the Grand Canyon and all that, before they dammed it. And it's incredible, the things that he talks about, how things will never be the same because society is coming in to supposedly make things better.
Yeah, and it's a shame. I mean, obviously we need things to be able to make our society function, but there's a line you need to draw somewhere. At some point you need to say that these things are relegated to stay the way they are, and that we need to find a different way to make our lives better.
Yeah.
It's upsetting. But I'm glad you did touch upon materialism, though, and that sort of idea, because I think other tenets of Alex's philosophy on life heavily involve self-sufficiency and materialism. And I think they both harken back to this sort of broader philosophy he subscribed to of transcendentalism, because I see a lot of similarities between him and Henry David Thoreau and all the sort of other transcendental writers. And I think the scene where Alex is talking to Wayne in the bar sums that up pretty well.
Society, man.
Yeah.
Society.
He says, Alex says, I'm going to be all the way out there, just on my own, no fucking watch, no map, no axe, no nothing, just be out there in it, big mountains, rivers, sky, game, just be out there in it, in the wild. And then Wayne's like, yeah, what are you going to do when you're there, mountain guy? And Alex says, you're just living, man. You're just there in that moment, in that special place and time. Maybe when I get back, I'll write you a book or something. And I think, I think he was being very genuine when he said all of that, and he meant every word,
Yeah.
and that excellently depicts his philosophy on that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So I myself battle a lot with doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I quote unquote relax, I feel like there's something else I could be doing.
Always.
There's something else I could be doing to further my career or reach a goal I want to do, or even like, I don't consider traveling doing nothing. I'm talking about like sitting around doing nothing.
Right.
And I think that that's something that we've been forced to think, is that we have to always be striving for better. And while it is good in a way, I think what Alex is trying to get to with that whole thing is that it is okay to get out there and just live.
Yeah.
And I think we lose a lot of that when we no longer have to hunt for our own food or purify water, or like melt snow into water,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. When everything is readily available with the click of a button or drive down the street,
Yep.
we lose a lot of what it really means to be alive. I think it's important for us to travel and get out in nature and do those things, because once you've experienced that, then you do have a yearning for more authentic experiences. And Alex, at one point when he's talking to Ron, says, the nature of man's spirit is new experiences, something like that, something along those lines. And I think that's very true. Like, you don't have to be making the next step towards your career goal or whatever. You can be just doing something new, and it fills your life up with happiness and joy and excitement. And I think that we lose that a lot in today's society, because we're told to work so much and always strive for better. And I think this is one example, but like the fact that we only get 2 weeks vacation at a salaried job that blows my mind, because I don't think that's nearly enough time for a person to truly get out and experience life.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Especially here in America, where we were founded on this sort of idea of capitalism and work yourself to the bone, and work. It's constantly perfecting and honing and putting in the time and effort. But there's something lost in that process. We become complacent, and I think reconnecting with nature in the way you just discussed allows us to have an appreciation for what we have when we come back into this world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think everything that you just described also comes back to the system we have, which is built on money. It's all an economic system, I think, when you look at it on the sort of macro level. And I think the film touches on that as well, because Alex also has no need for money, and we see this in his actions, and he visually he burns the money.
Right.
That's like a visual rejection of the society he was a part of.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because he later on gets jobs throughout the film.
Right.
And he despises it, but he realizes that unless you can be entirely self-sufficient in this world, that you unfortunately have to have money.
Yeah.
And he writes to Wayne at one time saying, this money you paid me makes tramping too easy.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's not like he doesn't want the money. He doesn't want the money, but he realizes that he needs it to get the basic needs that, like food and shelter and all that, are supposed to be basic needs, yet in today's society we need so much money to get those basic needs.
Yeah.
And I think he found that living a life where those basic needs were more readily available was more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that I feel that way. Not that I'm not there yet, but like there is a time that I would like to be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And I think there's just something very satisfying in self-sufficiency.
Right.
Not having to rely on anybody else.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely an allure there. And I think the film presents that idea that you've just said regarding money. But at the same time, there's the scene where Alex is talking to Jan and Rainey the first time he interacts with them on that beach. And Jan says Alex could have a vehicle as well, but he decided to burn all of his money. And Alex defiantly says, I don't need money. It makes people cautious. And then Jan says, well, you got to be a little cautious. The book of yours is cool and all, but you can't depend entirely on leaves and berries. And Alex says, I don't know if I want to depend on much more than that. So is money something that makes us cautious?
Yeah, I think so. In the short life that I've lived post high school, I guess, because money didn't really matter in high school. Everything was provided for you.
Yeah.
At least for me. I know that there are other people that have other experiences, but
Sure.
like I lived in a middle class family,
Right.
so I always had food and shelter and all that. But then once I had to pay for my own rent and stuff, I had to be careful about where I spent my money, and there was a caution to every action I made. So I live in my van, technically.
Yeah.
There are some caveats to that statement, but most of my non-electronic belongings are inside my van, and I sleep inside my van. And not having to pay rent makes me not have to worry about that portion of money that I would have to worry about otherwise. And at the beginning of the year, I got myself into some debt, and all I could think about was the debt and like how I was going to save up and pay it off. And once I finally like came to terms with it and was like, I'll be fine. Like, yeah, I have it and I'll have to pay it off eventually, but there's no sense in worrying about it. Like,
Right.
I don't need to have all this caution about
Yeah.
it. And that made my life much freer.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answered your question.
I don't know if there is a distinct answer to it, and I think everyone has a different relationship with money
Yes.
and opinion on the matter. But I think it makes you cautious only insofar as how deeply ingrained of a member of society you are.
Mm-hmm.
Alex being on the very periphery, even the idea of, like you said, having money or being paid for a job, he said it made tramping too easy, you know?
I mean, I don't worry about. Me personally, I've come to terms with the fact that I need money if I want to travel and all that.
Right.
So I'm okay with money. It's not like I hate money.
Right.
But me personally, I don't obsess about like, I don't care if I ever get $1 million or anything like that. It's just, I value time and experiences more than I value money.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing to be taken away. And Alex doesn't overtly come out and say this, but I think you can see from the film that from a character where money is no object, and he's able to derive happiness from 2 years of poverty, really,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to put it in those sorts of terms. I think it easily dispels with the notion that you need money to be happy or to create a life in which you can be happy.
Right.
Happiness sort of emanates from within. So let's move on to the theme of individualism. Alex is a very unique individual.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that struck me as odd was his adoption of a new identity upon embarking on this quest. Alexander Supertramp.
Yeah.
What do you make of that action?
There are some title cards throughout that say like chapter 1, chapter 2.
Yes.
And that right before he creates his new identity is when he says, it's chapter 1, I believe.
Yeah.
Called My Own Birth. And I think that was his way of forgetting the past life that he had,
Mm-hmm.
the life that he had led for the last 21 or 22 years, whatever
Yeah.
it was, and starting anew. Because that's right after he leaves his car, he burns his money. He burned his Social Security card and
Mm-hmm.
cut up his ID, his credit cards, all that. And I think he was just really fed up with not necessarily who he had been, but the people that he was connected to.
Yeah.
And I think that he just felt the need to start over completely, which I can understand. But then I think that one of the most important things to note is at the end, it's kind of ironic because he's reading Dr. Zhivago,
Mm-hmm.
and he comes upon the line, her job on Earth became to call each thing by their own name, or something like that.
Yes.
And that's when he decides to go foraging for berries and seeds and whatnot, which ultimately his, not stupidity, but his...
Ignorance.
Yeah, his ignorance. He goes about to find the edible plants, and then in his ignorance, he doesn't double check that he's looking at the right plants before eating them, and that's what gets him. And then at the end, there's a little note. He had carved his note in the wood
Mm-hmm.
right when he got there, dated or signed Alexander Supertramp, and then he writes one last note, and then the camera moves up and it says Christopher Johnson McCandless. And I think that's the really interesting thing, because he wanted so desperately to forget that life,
Mm-hmm.
and then once he realized that he could have all these new experiences and be this other person, but I think he felt something in those old relationships.
Yeah.
At least with his sister.
He definitely saw the importance of calling something by its name.
Yeah.
Which is brutally ironic because it's what ultimately led to his death. I think it's also sad that in the beginning he felt so disconnected from his family and I guess the other relationships in his life, because we don't even see any friends or
we're not
acquaintances
really,
he might have had, that he felt so far removed from those that he took it upon himself to create a new identity. I mean, the identity you come to have, at least by the time you graduate college, you know, you're not this solid rock of a person yet, but you have a pretty good sense of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And to not only reject the life you are a part of, but the person you were, that's pretty profound. To say I'm no longer that person because of the situation I lived in.
Right. And I don't think it's fair to either self that you decide to be, because he could not become Alexander Supertramp had he not been Christopher McCandless and had all of his thoughts that made him become Alexander Supertramp.
Yeah, you definitely have to own your past.
Right.
Because it's the reason you are who you are today.
Right.
So to throw it away is not helpful or smart, but I think he realized that in the end.
Yes, exactly.
And that's the important, that he made that revelation. Yeah. But something else that I think is pretty interesting is that, coupled with the idea of this identity formation and being alone and, you know, existing in solitude, one definitely has to spend time by oneself to come to know oneself, I think. And being a part of society or being part of a culture has become a huge tenet of what it means to exist in today's world. I think we've moved farther away from individualism than we should have.
Mm-hmm.
But this sort of idea of being alone and discovering who you are exists sort of in contrast with being a member of society. And Alex's case, you know, what he did and how far away he went and the relationships he burned, I think is an extreme example.
Mm-hmm.
But what then in that sense do you think is the role of society or the individual's role in it? How do we cope with being these unique little snowflakes in a sea of unique little snowflakes?
In a way, society has told us that we have to be individualized.
Right.
While also spoon-feeding us mass consumption, mass consumerism. And I think everybody needs to decide their own level of uniqueness that they want and try to achieve that. I mean, if you're content with dressing up like everybody else and living the nuclear family life,
mm-hmm.
and if that's what you want, cool. If you do some little thing and that's what makes you an individual, that's fine. I think individualism is very much so up to the individual and deciding how much of a unique life you want to lead.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Alex takes it a step too far, and in rejecting his family, he simultaneously rejected society. And I think that was a mistake. I'm glad he was able to forge relationships with people along the road,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't feel the need to head straight to Alaska.
Yes. So right before he leaves, he looks at the picture of his parents in his wallet and throws it away.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't like that. And it could be because I have a much different relationship with my parents. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we go on to learn that Alex's family life is really messed up.
Yeah.
But I think the very interesting storyline that gets thread through is the Jan and Rainey storyline.
Yes.
And how when he first meets Jan and Rainey, they're welcoming and he stays with them and like sort of opens Jan up a little bit
Mm-hmm.
to reconnect with Rainey. But then as soon as they resemble something of a family towards him, he gets out.
Yeah.
And he repeatedly does that. The only time he doesn't do that is when he is with Wayne.
Right.
Because Wayne is the only person he keeps in contact with after he leaves them.
Yeah.
Which I think is definitely worth noting. I mean, that's how the film opens,
Mm-hmm.
is a letter to Wayne.
Yeah.
And I think Alex had a lot of problems with family
Mm-hmm.
because he had such a messed up family. He didn't want anything that resembled a family.
Yeah.
But I think he did yearn for friendship.
Yeah.
And he found that in Wayne very much so.
Yeah.
Which is, I think that's why he continued writing to Wayne. And like he wasn't really, I mean, he had told Wayne of his want to go to Alaska and everything, but he wasn't making active moves to leave South Dakota until Wayne got arrested and all that.
Yeah. I mean, he stayed there for some indefinite amount of time.
Yeah.
Working.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting. I was surprised to see he earned a nice chunk of change
Oh, yeah.
doing all of that work.
It's interesting because I wonder what would have happened if Wayne hadn't been arrested.
I think Alex still would have moved on.
Yeah.
I think he would have had to.
Yeah, I think so as well. But there's the thought that maybe more time with Wayne would have opened Alex up more to close relationships that resembled family. But It is very interesting that like anytime something gets close to a familial relationship, he's out. Jane and Rainey both times out. Ron out. Like it breaks my heart when Ron asks to adopt him and he walks away saying, "Can we talk about it later?" Just because I think there's an inherent fear that family is bad. And while Ron has the best of intentions, Alex is worried that something bad would happen.
Yeah, and even I expected that goodbye to be the most profound in the film. This is the last relationship with someone he's going to have before going to Alaska.
Yeah.
And it was the most meaningful. And I was disappointed as a viewer to see Alex go and to leave Ron there, especially after Ron just asking that question. And it obviously took so much out of him. It was upsetting.
It is. I mean, I cry every time I watch this film, and that's when it starts, and it continues through his sister's voiceover with the home video. Usually I just shed a couple tears. I was sobbing this time, like full on, like gasping for air, sobbing. And
oh boy.
I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, I don't know. Hitting home.
Hitting too close to home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you better be careful of some of your life choices these next couple of years. Or maybe that'll hit too close for comfort.
No, I that's where I think again this is inherently a warning tale.
Yeah,
it's a cautionary tale.
Right.
Because there are so many times when things are set up for Alex to go well, to like make changes in his life that could lead to his happiness, and he every time shuts them down.
Yeah,
and I think that the whole message of happiness is only real when shared at the very end. Him denying that shared happiness every time it comes up
right,
is that cautionary tale of, he even says to Ron at one point that you don't need to share happiness. He says it in a more profound way, but he basically says, like, you're silly to think that you need other people to be happy. Yeah. And then at the end, he turns around and realizes that that's actually what you do need to be happy. You need that connection. And I think that's what I've taken away. As much as I want to like travel and do extreme things, go into the wild, I always keep that in the back of my mind that I can't be selfish here. I can't like climb up this tree and, not worry about what my parents will think if something happens.
Right.
And I think that reservation in me has definitely come from watching this film and heeding the warning.
Yeah, that's good, because I think it goes over a lot of viewers' heads. Because I think Alex's approach to life and his way of living is desirable. I think a lot of people, upon seeing it, especially if they're stuck in some sort of corporate 9-to-5 world, that sort of complete opposite is very attractive to some people. But I think it's about taking that opposite view that Alex has on life, the sort of 180, and being able to take the positives from it, take what he has to think and say as a whole, and divide it somehow evenly with your current situation, your current circumstances, and find a happy medium, and not going out balls deep into the Alaskan wilderness and dying because you ate the wrong plant.
Right.
There's a quote at one point when Alex says, "I think careers are a 20th century invention, and I don't want one. You don't need to worry about me. I have a college education. I'm not destitute. I'm living this life by choice."
Immediately, the idea of career, I think the idea of a career is you have these steps in mind to get to your final resting place in the working world.
Or your resting place in the ground.
That too. And I think that a lot of people today see careers as what your life is about. Like your life is defined by career, what you achieved. If you were a CEO, then you did it. You made it.
It becomes part of your identity.
Right.
People define themselves based on their work.
Right.
Because of how much time they spend doing it.
Yes. And I definitely struggle with that because I like to work. I enjoy work, but also the work I'm doing is creating film and TV, web, video, all that. You know, it's not inherently 9-to-5 work, but I do struggle with the idea of a quote-unquote work-life balance.
Right.
So I'm drinking some water right now, and it's a Life is Good mug, and it says, "Do what you like what you do." And I think that is a very good motto to live by. You know, they always say, like, if you find a job that you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
That whole mindset. But then I have found a job I like, but if I am quote unquote working, putting in hours to make money and all that, what am I sacrificing that I could have otherwise? And I live in my van, but I don't inherently want to go drive around for the rest of ever. I enjoy work enough to stay and do work, but I don't want work to be my life. And I think that's a really hard balance to figure out.
It is. And I think most people go their whole lives without ever doing so.
Yeah.
Or you figure it out by the time you're ready to retire, and at that point, I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all victims of this sort of postmodern America where we feel the need to almost live up to our ancestors who built and forged this country on a certain set of principles and values that may have been necessary at the time for socioeconomic or political reasons, but I think as we move further and further away from that, and we're seeing it in a lot of sort of European or Nordic countries, this working to the grind, this 9 to 5 every day, especially doing menial work or work that you don't enjoy, it's not indicative of any greater cause or service. You're not doing anybody any favors by working some job you don't like.
Right. But the flip side of the coin is that if everybody left their jobs, society would not exist.
Right. And that's another thing I think about is, we can all watch this film and take things away from it, but if everyone watched this film on the same day and said, well, I'm going to go out into the wild.
Right. Society would just...
We can't all be beautiful little snowflakes. We can't all be...
Right. Somebody's got to be the accountant.
Right.
And I guess the only hope is that the accountant likes being an accountant.
I sure hope so.
I mean, I don't know. That's like...
Mine seems like he does.
That's good. But that's the kind of thing you have to hope, is that not everybody would want to go into the wild.
Yeah.
We've gone so far down the path of societal evolution that we can't go back. Like, there are too many things in place, too much infrastructure, too many... But I think as long as you and I can be happy with going into the wild and never coming back, as long as not everybody else wants to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as they're going to stay back and keep that under wraps.
Right. I mean, I don't mean that in a selfish way. I just mean...
I understand.
Because then that would beg to the whole point of what really is being an individual if everybody wants the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe then the cool thing to do would be to form a civilization and form a society into the concrete jungle.
It's just a circle
be an
of
Oscar
life.
Winner. Yeah. Let's move on and talk about the sort of theme of experience or life experience. We touched on this a bit. The film reminds me a lot of, as much as I hate to say it, Forrest Gump, in sort of the way in which there's just this idea that there's a world out there.
Yeah.
There's things out there for you to experience. There's peoples and places and things that you can't see or come to understand from the safety of your home, or even your hometown for that matter.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the idea of escaping that and getting out there and the value of personal experience?
A couple times tonight you've said my least favorite word in the English language, complacency, or complacent, any derivative of it, of the root word.
Why is it your least favorite word?
Because it's the root of all evil and sadness. I mean, I don't mean to be overdramatic, but I think that there are so many times in life when I've caught myself becoming complacent. And those are the times that I realize I need to change something in my life. And once I change that thing, I become exponentially happier.
Yeah.
Like, I quit my office job back in June, and it was that, like, I was complacent with hating my job, but making the stupidly low amount of money that I was making and scraping by and convincing myself that it's all good. I'll be okay. I'll get a raise or something. And then I was like, no, I'm going to quit. Because I realized I wasn't happy, and I was like, I quit, and my source of income went away, but I was so much happier. And that kind of goes back to our thing of when you have money, you're cautious and all that. But complacency, I just hate it. I hate it. Like, I don't think I'll ever hold a job for more than a year. I just can't foresee it because I just get tired of jobs.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's not that I get tired of working. I just get tired of doing the same thing over and over again.
I hear you there.
Like, since quitting my job, I've begun doing other freelance film work, but it's all been the same thing for the last 6 months, and it's getting monotonous.
Yep.
And I'm like, I am dying to change. But at the same time, I think that you can get complacent with other things.
Oh, definitely.
And they can be just as toxic. Like I was complacent with a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and it was awful.
Yeah.
Like I was not aware of it at the time. I was like, "Oh, this is good. I'm content. I'm happy here." And then like the wool was pulled back from my eyes, and I was like, "What have I been doing for the last 2 years?"
Uh-huh.
I think you always need to be, not in a greedy way, but I think you always need to be wanting more. Because I
Yes.
think there are so many things in life that everyone should experience. I'm not saying that everyone should experience the same things, but there are so many things to each individual that we should go through and learn and see and everything. And I think that when you're complacent, you don't have any interest in doing those things.
Yeah.
And that's just sad.
It is. Yeah, there's happiness in contentment. There's a happiness in being able to appreciate what you have and being able to say, I don't need XYZ to be happy. I can allow it to manifest from a place within myself. But to live in that state is complacency, and to not have a drive to ever want more or to do more. You know, you might be happy in that moment and that present time, that one fleeting second, but life is change. Life is perpetual change.
Yes. Yes, and I think that's why you see a lot of people, like, I think that itself is like why midlife crises happen. Because you get through half your life and you're like, I've been complacent for the last 30, 40, 50 years.
I'm surprised it takes people that long. I feel like I've had 7 this past summer.
Same, me too.
I was like, I'm 22. If this is this bad, how bad is my 40-year-old one going to be?
Yeah.
Not looking forward to that.
Yeah, and at 22, I bought a bus out of nowhere. I don't know if that's a midlife crisis or not, but...
No, buses are cool.
Yeah, they are. But even still, so just to put it in a real-life example real quick, like I live in my van now, and I have my bus, and my van has been broken down for the last 6 months. It finally works again, and I'm like, oh, well, I could just like take the bus back to my parents' house and then finish it this summer and live in the van until then and just keep riding out what I'm doing now. I'll tell myself that. I'll be like, yeah, just keep doing what's working now. And then I'll think about it, and I'm like, but what's working now, I think about every day why it doesn't make me happy. And it's not that I'm brooding in sadness and wishing for other things. Like, I consider myself a very happy person. I try to always find the happiness in a situation.
Right.
But I think that always trying to find the happiness also brings out the things that make me sad or mad, and like I really key in on those things and try to figure out how to get rid of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's cyclical. Like I'll break through and be like, I did it. Now I can get complacent for a couple months. And then I realize I've been complacent and break through again.
It's a fine line.
Yes.
And it's extremely difficult. And I think this is really something that Alex struggles with as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's the scene with Alex and Ron when Alex is running up the side of one of the hills to get a view of something. And Ron says, what are you running from? Not literally, but, metaphorically. Alex responds, I can ask you the same thing.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of speaks to the notion that whether or not we're physically running away from something like Alex is, or whether we're running away from ideas or feelings or emotions like Ron is, I think we're all running from something. And that's a cause of complacency almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that same scene, he tells Ron he needs to make a radical change in his lifestyle. Yeah,
that's where he says the core of a man's spirit comes from new experiences.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, that's what we've been talking about. It's a vicious cycle, but I think it's unavoidable. And as long as you're aware of it, you can do your best to control how much time you spend on particular parts of the cycle.
Yes.
And I think that's the best we can do.
Yeah, if you're aware and you're in control, I think you're doing good. Because I think there's always going to be that devil on your shoulder that's like, this is great, stay here, don't change anything.
Yeah. Fuck him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to something a little more uplifting. And one of my favorite themes of the film, which you don't see very often in film, is that of literature. I'm an avid reader, and I loved the way in which the film focuses on the importance of books and reading and the knowledge one gleans from them, and the sort of beautiful prose in the way Alex writes and the way he's able to read these things to us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's obviously very well-read, college-educated lad, and I like that he was influenced by these writers like Jack London or Henry David Thoreau,
Tolstoy.
Yeah, all these people that have pretty much encouraged him to sort of hit the road and see the world,
right.
Especially Alaska with Jack London. I think he's his favorite. And Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is a transcendentalist, actually wrote an essay called Self-Reliance. So I mean, like these writers, I think, pretty much forged the sort of identity that Chris stepped into when he became Alex. You know, he was sort of living up to that sort of ideal. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on the sort of all these inclusions or these literary analogies?
I think it's really interesting. Like even Henry David Thoreau, he wrote Walden, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you read that?
Yes.
That's a very similar goal, to go out into the wild and live on your own.
Yep.
But when we read that in high school, one of the things that we keyed in on was Henry David Thoreau was all about living on your own and self-sufficiency, but he, in one of the chapters, talks about how he had to go into town to get an axe so he could chop down wood. And that in itself destroys all self-sufficiency. And I think that while Alex yearns for the self-sufficiency, and he even at one point, and when he's at the bar with Wayne, he goes, I won't have a watch, won't have an axe, all that. And like that itself could be a call to Thoreau right there, with not having an axe.
Yeah.
Have you read the book Into the Wild?
I've not. I've had it forever and it sits on my shelf, and I go, I'm going to read that sometime, and I will.
So it's awesome. And I saw the movie first, and then I read the book. But I was expecting the book to be linear, just like Alex goes point A to point B, like almost a diary.
Right.
But what it is Jon Krakauer, he tells Alex's story while also telling his own story. And that's the part that gets left out of the movie is Jon Krakauer's experiences. And I think that it would have been an entirely different movie, and it's good that that part is omitted.
Right.
But reading the book, it's very interesting because Krakauer almost takes Chris's experiences and uses them as a source of literature too. Because like there's a chapter about when Krakauer almost dies himself.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. He's like summiting a mountain in Alaska, and he relates different experiences in his life to Alex and his experience, and it's fascinating. But so I think it's almost necessary for all of the literature to be embedded, and I think that it heightens the movie because it inherently heightens the movie just because the quotes and everything are so well written. The selections, I mean, are so well written. But it also then gives the viewers something to think about, something to look for. Like, I haven't read all the books that are in the movie, but I would like to. And I think that reading each one will let me understand Chris better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I mean, again, going back to identity, you know, the sorts of things that you surround yourself with and let influence you become a part of you. And obviously all of these writers have influenced him. And I think being able to read these works and not just understand the context of the work in and of themselves and how they relate to the film, but how they relate to Chris and sort of what influence they have in sculpting a person and causing someone to make decisions about their life and the sort of outlook they hold on it. It's fascinating. Very few films can do this, but this film feels like a good book. And I mean, it follows the structure of a book. We have, you know, chapters and whatnot, and we're constantly being read to and narrated to.
Yeah.
But I feel like I could watch 10 hours of this. This film could be 10 hours long, I feel like, and I'd be fine with it. And I wouldn't notice. And I feel like I can, you know, a good book I can keep reading forever. And it's the same sort of thing.
It watches like a good book too. Every time I watch this, I'll pick out something new. Yeah. And it gets better. Yeah.
And I also love the film uses all of the sort of traditional literary conflicts too. We have man versus self, man versus man versus society, man versus nature, obviously. I guess man versus technology is omitted, but I think that's a statement in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, it sucks that Chris is this sort of character who's just sort of at odds with everything around him. But the fact that I think it serves this sort of overarching theme of literature and its importance, I think is pretty profound. I definitely appreciate it. But speaking to Chris sort of being at odds with things, let's start delving into his character a little deeper. There's the one quote that he says to Rainey when they're talking about Jan and why she's become a little more distant. And Chris says, some people feel like they don't deserve love. They walk away quietly into empty spaces, trying to close the gaps of the past. What did you make of that?
I've heard the part about people thinking they don't deserve love. Like, so many people throw that around.
Yeah.
And I think to a point, for a lot of people, it is true that they don't think they deserve love.
Yeah.
And I think it takes someone showing them love to realize it. Because you have, if you, in Jan's instance, you have so many bad things that happen. Your son leaves, your husband divorces you. Like, you start to think that something's wrong with you. that you don't deserve that love, and you have to, exactly what he says, you have to go away and close that part of your past. And I think that the awesome thing that happens in that scene is that Chris says he's afraid of water, and he makes a bet with Rainey that if he goes in the water, Rainey has to take the firewood back. And I don't think Rainey expected Chris to then go and be with Jan. But I think that the fact that he did, it's kind of incredible, because it was just that little bit of playing with her in the water and showing her love, not a romantic love, but almost a mother-son love, like that let her open back up to Rainey. And I think it is that you just have to, for those people that feel like they don't deserve love, it takes somebody showing them love, whether it is romantic or friend, to really accept it. And then once they can accept that somebody loves them, they can share love exponentially more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think what kind of upset me about that interaction was right after Chris says the quote, and he then mentions about going in the water, is that just before he mentions that, I thought he was going to open up about himself, and he was going to have a moment with Rainey where he shared something as well. But he immediately changed the subject, and immediately became about him projecting his own fear onto something else instead of speaking from a place of something inside him, something internal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's able to pinpoint Jan's problem so eloquently, because it's the same problem he faces. And I think
absolutely.
I don't think it's the exact same as Jan's circumstance, but I think he too felt like he didn't deserve love, or because he never was loved, he didn't understand what it meant or how he should feel it or show it or express it.
Right. It kind of goes hand in hand with what we talked about earlier about his fear of family. Because even right after he shows Jan that love, as soon as she and Rainey start doing their thing, he's like, I'm getting out of here.
I'm out skis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also the scene before that. Jan asks where his parents are, where your mom and dad.
Yeah.
And Alex is living their lives somewhere. And Jan says, well, you look like a love kid. Can't you be fair? And Alex says, fair? What do you mean fair? And she's like, you know what I mean. And he says, I'll paraphrase Thoreau here. Rather than love, than money, than faith, than fame, than fairness, give me truth.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think he meant by that sort of snarky, sarcastic response?
There are parts when I inherently don't like this character, because as much as he is searching for truthness and the ultimate truth and nature, and he's searching for authenticity in life.
Right.
And I think he inherently shuts down things that can be very well authentic. Like love can be authentic, but I think if you're only searching for truth, then you're passing things up.
Yeah, I think the problem is, one, he's speaking about things that don't exactly have universal definitions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not well versed enough in Thoreau to know exactly what he was referencing in this particular context. But we'd like to think of truth as something as an absolute, and it is. But in the sense that Alex is using it, it's definitely something subjective.
Oh, yeah.
And he equates all of these universal ideals to something relating to or existing in nature. Nature is authentic because it is what it is. It's self-sufficient. But to argue that relationships or love or coexisting with parents and being able to have interactions with them, to say that's not authentic,
mm-hmm.
which I think is what he's saying, is flawed, and it's wrong.
Yeah, that goes into exactly what he had said to Rainey.
Or Ron.
Yeah, that too.
Whenever he says you're wrong if you think that the joy of life comes principally from human relationships.
Right. But he is in a way redeemed at the end.
He is.
I think.
Yeah.
It's just sad that it took what happened to him for him to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an upsetting arc to have to go through. But it is upsetting because in regards to his family, we see it in the first scene they're all in, how different they all are. His parents are sort of highbrow, high class, materialistic
mm-hmm.
consumers, and Alex is sort of frugal and minimalistic, and he rejects all of that. And I'm surprised they were even able to get as far along as they did in their relationship for them being so different.
Yeah.
Unless, I guess that was just like a facade, the whole them meeting up for dinner after graduation.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't seem too thrilled to do it.
It's like a let's play nice so we can enjoy this day sort of thing.
Right.
I can understand that.
Yeah. But even so, there's still things right away. His dad's like, we're going to buy you a new car.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, what's wrong with Datsun? And then he goes into this thing where he's like, I don't want things.
Yep.
And that is inherently a part of his character. Not even just, it's not that he's not materialistic. He's like anti-materialistic.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say to a fault, because I think materialism is something that everybody has to personally decide what level of they want to experience.
Right.
But that immediately sets up his character for me. And how much it contrasts with his parents.
Yeah, they're at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. While I think we can relate to Chris in that scene and sort of understand where he's coming from with a place of disagreeing with your parents, having different ideas from them, liking the sort of idea of rejecting materialism. I think as the film goes on, though, we begin to sort of see some of the flaws in Alex's philosophy and some of the problems with that. There's also in the scene at the bar with Wayne, Alex says, you know what I don't understand? I don't understand why every fucking person is so bad to each other so often. It doesn't make sense to me. Judgment, control, all that, the whole spectrum. And Wayne says, what people are we talking about? And Chris says, parents, hypocrites, politicians. And Wayne, referring to, I guess, Chris's mind at this point, says, this is a mistake. It's a mistake to get too deep in all that stuff, Alex. You're a hell of a young guy, but I promise you this, you can't be juggling blood and fire all the time. Mm-hmm. So do you think Alex is too idealistic for his own good?
Yes, I think his fatal flaw is that he himself is a hypocrite in ways. Yeah. Because he hates how people judge and belittle and all that, yet he's doing the exact same thing to his parents.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the more time you spend investing yourself in other people's happiness, unless you're forging some sort of relationship that fosters happiness between two people, typically us focusing on other people's happiness, we're comparing and we're contrasting and we're measuring up and
often sacrificing things that would make us happy.
Exactly, and it's not worth it.
Yeah,
we can't measure our own happiness or levels of success or anything to anybody else because we all use different metrics to define those things. And to make any comparisons is a complete waste of time, I think. So it's upsetting that Alex feels that he has the need to do that, but I think he has these feelings and these emotions about his parents, and he doesn't know how to cope with them. He doesn't know how to deal with them. His solution was to simply run away from them. So I don't know. I guess I can't really blame the guy. But do you think he ever gets lonely? I mean, he runs to nature. He did spend some time on the road with people, and he does forge new relationships. But the goal is always the Alaskan wilderness by himself. So do you think he gets lonely? Is nature enough for him? Is he content in nature when the going is good?
I think he was content in nature when he found happiness in his solitude in nature when it was a step to get him to Alaska. Yeah. But then once he's in Alaska, in one of his notes, he writes lonely and scared. And I think it's sort of that, like, he had the pie in the sky, and then when it was not what he expected, it really hit him what he had done.
And it was right around the time that I think he realized that nature is authentic because it's cold and heartless. It's
forgiving.
It's inherently not human.
Yeah.
And it was around that time that when he became trapped there, when the river sort of thawed and he was sort of stuck where he was.
When he was lonely, he realized he took that self-portrait and sort of like slicked his hair and like packed his bag and then was ready to go back.
And then realized he was trapped.
Yeah.
It's very upsetting. But as sad as his story is, it's reassuring that he was at least able to see part, if not all, of his hypocrisy and come to understand that in that time of solitude and loneliness that he did make a mistake. And, it might not have been all his fault or all his parents' fault, but I think what sums it up really well is when Ron tells Chris, when you forgive, you love. And that whole interaction with them up on top of the mountain.
Yeah. And so I think the movie ends on that as well. If you remember, he has zipped up and he's looking out the window at the clouds and he's smiling, and then the clouds start warping and you get flash frames of him and you hear his voiceover and it's something like,
he says, what if I were smiling and running into your arms? Yeah. Would you see then what I see now?
But I thought that was a very powerful image when he's hugging his parents and the sun is just not coming out. And then it cuts back to him.
Yeah.
And he takes his last breath when the sun comes out.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful ending, as sad as it is. It's more profound than I can even attempt to put into words.
I think the little bit of text at the end, it's a long shot or a long it starts on close up on his face and spins out and up, and it's obviously a helicopter, and it goes up, and the bus becomes a little tiny speck in the Alaskan wilderness, and it fades into the self-portrait he took, and explains how hunters found him, and then his sister went to Alaska to get his ashes and all that. And I think his sister's voiceover touches on it a lot.
Yeah.
The fact that he left her. Because in the very beginning of the film, it sets up a weird but strong relationship between...
They're very close.
Yeah. Like, they've gone through all of the horrors with their parents. There's the one part when she says, why didn't he call? If I didn't pick up, he could have just hung up. That is the one thing that I don't understand with his logic. Because it's a little unsatisfying that the film doesn't touch on it really at the end. Like, it does the whole flash frame thing with his parents. And like, would you see what I see? But it never really like closes out his relationship with his sister, other than showing her love for him to get his ashes and carry them on the plane in her backpack.
I think his final line is directly in reference to his relationship with his parents, but I think you can also broaden it or turn it around to make it also in reference to his sister, because what if I were smiling running into your arms, assuming that he had seen the error of his ways and he's going back to his family, or to his sister in this case, would you see then what I see now? He's admitting the error of his ways, but I think he's simultaneously asking for forgiveness. And I'm upset that the film doesn't dwell on his relationship with his sister, but I admire that as well. I think all of this just goes back to the point that transcendentalism, like communism, is a great idea. You know, it reads really well off the page, but when you live by it strictly and you put it into practice, I think you come to realize that there are several inherent flaws with it, and it's not a viable philosophy to live by. Yeah, and I think that was ultimately his downfall. Would you ever do anything similar?
As far as what?
Well, you watched the movie. You saw everything that happened. Would you do anything similar to that, to going into the wild? I assume you're not going to go look for a magic bus in Alaska, but what's the closest you would come to being an Alexander Supertramp?
That's very hard to say, because I think I have taken in the words of caution in this film so much that as much as I would like to pack up and leave everything behind, I'm so aware that happiness is based in relationships that I do at one point in my life in the next few years, hopefully, I would like to do a long solo backpacking trip, to do just to be out in nature by myself and really like just experience it by myself. But that would never be the end all be all goal of finding solitude. But I mean, as far as going out into the Alaskan wilderness, yeah, I would absolutely do that.
Yeah.
I mean, but same thing, I would plan it very much to a T. Like the idea of walking into wilderness with no path, not following a trail, the allure of that is awesome. But the practicality of that is terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, to go against what Alex said, I think caution is necessary in some regards. Yes. And I'm glad to hear and see that your life philosophy has been impacted by the film, but not wholly tainted by it. Because there is a middle ground. Yeah. And you seem to be living happily within it or near it. So
yes,
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, without going too deep, it's winter now when we're recording this, and a lot of people are worried about me living in my van. So I have a desk at a co-working space, and the owner keeps harping on me. He's like, "You have the money. Why don't you just rent the spare room and put a bed in there?" And it's like, I might have the money, and that might be a good practical idea, but that's not what I want right now. And I think it's very hard for a lot of people to accept when somebody wants something that may not be socially acceptable or a social norm. I've realized that a lot living in my van. People are like, "Why? Why are you doing that?"
Well, yeah, it goes back to judging others based on our personal conceptions of happiness or our own life choices. And just because the majority of people's coincide because they live in a society that values that doesn't mean it's right or that it's correct.
Right. Like I said, I was sobbing at the end of it, and I think it's because I'm going through a lot of things that relate to ideals that he held and things that he went through.
Yeah. This is the first time I've seen the film, I guess, since we've become good friends. And I was like, shit, Alden. Alden. It's Alden.
Yeah.
So
That's like awesome to hear and terrifying at the same time.
well, I'm watching it and I'm thinking, would Alden do? No, Alden wouldn't do that. Alden has more sense than that. But it was just, I don't know. There's a bus. He goes out west. He has long hair. Alden.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Why is Into the Wild a movie you need to watch before you die?
Sean Penn is an amazing director. I think he's an amazing filmmaker in general because he acts and everything. But just the vision that he was able to form. I mean, yeah, he had the book to help as a launching point, but it's beautiful. It does an amazing job of portraying the beauty that America has. Like, in even the mundane parts of it, like the wheat fields and stuff. Like, while that's not inherently a picturesque thing, he finds a way to make it beautiful. And like, the dismal Alaska scenes are gorgeous. Like the one point when Alex is standing on the little, it's not really an island, but it is an island in the middle of the braided river in Alaska, and he's shooting into the air. Like, that's supposed to be, it is a very sad scene, but I couldn't help being like, oh, it's so beautiful. And
yeah.
But aside from how well shot it is and how awesome it looks, the storytelling itself is incredible, but that is large in part due to the book because it very much follows the structure of the book.
Right.
But even still, it breaks to the normal structure of film storytelling because it's not linear
Right.
entirely. It is, but it's broken up and intercut and stuff. But it does a very good job of juxtaposing the different time periods of his life and how they all connect to each other. And it's very interesting to watch. The first time I showed my dad, he was like, I don't think it would be a good film if it was all linear.
No, it would. There's something in the juxtaposition between the time he spends alone in Alaska and the time he spends with the people on the road that you wouldn't come to appreciate having seen them separately.
Right. So why should you see this movie before you die? I think that the one thing you can take from this is that complacency is a bad thing. And I think that's one of the inherent themes throughout this. And for me, it didn't really come to light in my life until I watched this movie for the first time.
Right.
And every time I watch it since, like right now, the whole time we've been talking, I'm like, oh, what am I, like, should I stop doing the job I'm doing right now? Stuff like that. And it makes you think about your life and the ultimate things that you find happiness in. And like whether the time you're spending on work or otherwise is worth it if it's not giving you the happiness that you want and deserve. And I think like it's an awesome story and it looks beautiful and it's well told and all that, but it's a film that I think everybody can relate to in one way or another. You may not want to go into the wild, but you might have problems with society and you could relate to it that way.
Right.
You might have parent issues, you can relate to it that way. Like there's so many different angles for anybody to grab onto that, and it will make you think about your life and not judge your life, but think about how you want to move forward with your life. Yeah. And I think when a film or a book or anything does that, it usually is life-changing for a person.
Yeah, I mean, it's required viewing. You're not a person unless you've seen films and read books and had experiences that do those sorts of things. And whether you agree with the film's philosophy or not, it has a philosophy and it shoves it in your face and you have to deal with it. Right. Then and there. And it might end in you lying in bed awake for a couple extra hours because you realize that your life is a sham or that you don't know what you're doing or if you're happy or what the fuck's going on.
Right.
But that's good. You're going to work yourself through that tunnel and you're going to come out the other end, hopefully a better person.
Right. I could go on forever about why you should watch it, but
we could do a whole podcast on this movie. No, yeah, we've spent a good amount of time on this one so far, I think, and we've covered a lot of ground. So, okay, everyone, I think that's it for this episode of Movies to Watch Before You Die. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it was a blast.
Pretty hearty discussion.
Yeah.
I love breaking down these sorts of films, and there's so much, you know?
Yeah.
Can never run out.
We really could go scene by scene on this.
We could. But I think that would ruin it at some point, though. Let's just enjoy it as a film, I guess.
Yeah.
Move on with our lives. And thank you all for tuning in. Hopefully you're all dealing with some strong sense of wanderlust or at least some sort of change towards personal freedom or self-sufficiency or whatever that is. So make sure you go out and conquer the world. But make sure you tell your parents you love them first because that's really important and it would mean the world to them. And as always, be sure to check out the links in the show notes to find out where you can buy this film. It's really a great one to watch every year or two to just remind yourself of all the simple beauties life has to offer. And also stay tuned for episode 8 of the podcast next Thursday, where we'll break down the 2008 film There Will Be Blood and discuss some interesting themes like the search for family, the purpose of religion, and the need to succeed. So make sure you check that out before next week so you know exactly what the hell we'll be talking about. Links to rent or buy this film are in the show notes, and at the time of this recording, the film is also on Netflix streaming, so take advantage of that if you got Netflix. If you'd like to support Movies to Watch Before You Die, please consider signing up for a free trial of Amazon Prime via the affiliate link in the show notes. With Amazon Prime membership, you get unlimited free 2-day shipping, access to Kindle ebooks, and most relevant to all you film nerds out there, access to thousands of movies and TV episodes on Amazon's virtual library. You get all those awesome things free for 30 days, and for every new sign-up, Amazon tosses some money our way. It's really great for all parties involved, so look for that link in the show notes and get started today. And finally, if you like what you heard this week on the podcast, please consider leaving us a review or a comment on whatever platform you use to tune in. Your feedback is crucial to the success of the show, so let us know what you think. And if you'd like to stay up to date on all things related to Movies to Watch Before You Die, be sure to join our mailing list via our website. That's markgazzega.com. All right, thanks for tuning in, friends. Until next time.